Well, let's start by looking at some questions that perhaps were the origins of some of the most interesting companies in the world at the moment. First one, how could we compete with hotels but without owning any hotels? Well, no surprises. Airbnb may well have started with that question. Actually, they didn't. We'll look at that in a moment. Second question, how could we have 7 times more customers per employee than a standard bank? Tangerine Bank has that very benefit from their way of working. How about this one? What if every track ever recorded could fit inside your pocket? Now you might be thinking iPod. I'm thinking Spotify. I don't think you could fit every track ever recorded on an iPod. Now, these questions may not have directly occurred to the company leaders when they first began, maybe Spotify. But if you asked them whether they would like these outcomes, I'm sure all of them would definitely agree that that's something worth pursuing. But it doesn't really matter whether these questions were the specific starting points or not. What does matter is that when they manage to achieve these impossible looking outcomes, the questions that we can reverse engineer out of them teach us some really interesting things about how to design really great questions. So what can we learn? Well, I think the thing that we can learn from these questions, born out of what other very disruptive organizations have done, is they do two things. First, they decode the rules of the game, and secondly, they deliberately mess with them. So what do I mean by that? Well, one of the fundamental tools that great innovative companies use is defining reality, having a very clear grasp of the DNA of what makes today work. How does pricing work? How does distribution work? What are the rules of the game? What are the things that everybody does in this industry so that we can show up and sell products and services effectively? And we kind of compete in these areas. Well, they define that and then they deliberately flip it. They flip the reality around, they look at those dynamics and they ask, how could we do one of those things in a completely counterintuitive way that would change the game, that would create a brand new place for us to operate or unlock untold benefits that we haven't been able to get our hands on because we're playing by the same rules as everybody else. Now, if you're familiar with the book Blue Ocean Strategy, this will probably sound somewhat familiar. It's about finding space that no one else is playing in. This is a tool to help you get to that same place, and you can use this approach very incrementally if you're looking for quick wins, or transformationally if you're looking to really change the game. So if you think about Uber, the story goes that one of the founders was standing in the pouring rain in San Francisco calling for a taxi, and half an hour later still none had arrived, and he blurted out, how could I push a button and have a taxi arrive within a few seconds? Well, at the time, the dynamics of the traditional taxi industry made that an impossible question to answer, unless you saw the constraints of the industry as an opportunity to do something very different. So, first, define reality and then flip reality. Now, let me give you some prompts that you can use to help you flip reality in some interesting new directions. So, first, think about the progress that customers are trying to make in their specific context. Now, this list is an abbreviated version of the longer list of progress dimensions that I introduced in Module 3. So, head back there or download that slide deck and you can see the list. So, that's the first part. Then deliberately apply some relevant dynamics that would redefine how the current status quo works. Now, depending on the level of disruption that you're pursuing, you can apply appropriately ambitious multipliers. So, look along the top of the at scale. If you just want an incremental change, you'd say, well, how could we do this 10% better? If you wanted real big change, scale change, how could we do this 100 times more effectively? So you apply the progress dynamics to the progress dimensions in the realm that you want to operate in. Now, one way of using this tool is to run what gets called a question storm. And instead, this brainstorm is for ideas, question storm is for questions. So what you're trying to do there is to encourage people to develop dozens of questions and then prioritize them according to their ability to trigger original ideas. Now, you will know when you've hit upon a great question. I remember once I was facilitating a question design workshop for a major drinks company, and a manager proposed a disruptive question that just created this hush around the room that then exploded into applause because people recognized that that single question had reframed the whole notion of how people access and consume drinks. Now, I'd love to be able to share that question, but I can't because of, there's going to be potentially competitors watching this video. But you will know when you hit a great question, it sends shivers down people's spines, and you know that you've hit something that is going to trigger some incredible ideas. So one other dimension to bring in here that can trigger powerful, relevant ideas is to pursue possibilities of how new technology could enable new progress. So try mixing some of these components in together and see what you come up with, because often this gets left out and yet it's opportunities that are right in front of us. And you'll apply some of these questions to progress dynamics and progress dimensions, and sometimes you might think, well, actually AI can't really help in this area. It doesn't matter, try it anyway. Any new technology or emerging technology that's maturing, that is ready to play with, just start throwing it into the mix and saying, what could this use in the near term? And then for bleeding edge technology that's starting to arrive, you're starting to anticipate what some of that potential could be. Ask that question again: how could this help us deliver X more progress than we're currently able to deliver? Oh my goodness, I can't get my words out with this module. So anyway, all of this is covered in Be Less Zombie in chapter 19, and at the end of this module I'm also going to give you a link to some sample catalytic questions that I've put together for free. So this way of thinking creates a huge difference to how creativity is focused inside organizations. And most innovation is product centric, and it's often leading with questions that are inward looking and self-interested rather than customer focused. And they're often so broad that they invite many ideas that are either just iterations of ideas that have been tried before, or they're just irrelevant. It's a fairly inefficient way of generating ideas that are actually going to turn into something that's really good. Now, that said, open questions can be good because they don't constrain thinking too much, but that's something that we'll look at in the next module around idea generation. So what's the alternative? Well, as we've been seeing, progress-centric questions channel people's creativity towards important customer outcomes and the products and services that they're going to love using. So what's more, you can calibrate the ambition of the questions with the level of performance change that you're aiming to create, whether that's incremental or transformational change. So how could we help customer X make progress Y in context Z? That is a laser focused question that you can dial up or dial down in terms of ambition, and keeps you focused on the things that matter most. So let's look at how we can practically start to put these things into practice.